Hello friends, thanks for joining us here with the San Diego State Sports MBA Program. We're looking to have a lot of fun with this forum. We're calling it the Sports Biz Connection. I'm joined here by a few friends. I'll introduce them to you real quickly. This is Greg White. He's a member of the 2019 class alongside me. How you doing?
Good, and yourself?
Doing well. My name's Andy Bishop, by the way. And then I've got Jim Trotter here. How you doing, sir?
Good, sir. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us here. And finally, Donald Brown. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'll let everybody kind of do a little bio here. I'm originally from the San Diego area, and like I said, I'm a member of the 2019 class alongside Greg. I know you're from the East Coast. What made you come out here and kind of become part of this sports MBA program?
So I'm originally from Michigan. I went to school in upstate New York, and I wanted to get back involved with the sports business, and so I was with the football team in college. Looked up a couple programs online, and San Diego was high on my list, and here I am.
Yeah, here we are, the number 4 ranked program globally. Jim, you've been in San Diego for a while. You
almost 30 years.
You wrote for the Union Tribune for almost 2 decades, worked for SI, ESPN for 4 years. How are things going for you?
Things are great. So just to think that I could live in America's finest city for almost 30 years and yet work around the country, it's been great. So primarily just covering the NFL the last 2 decades, just been through all the trials and tribulations of sports in San Diego.
Yeah, and fitting, we have somebody that played in the NFL for 7 years. Donald Brown played with the Colts and the Chargers. You retired a couple years ago, but you found yourself back here in San Diego doing some good work with the student athletes at SDSU.
Right, and like Jim was saying, it's tough to leave this city. So that's what brought us back, and then just to be a part of a great athletic department, working in student athlete development, couldn't ask for a better situation. So excited to be back in San Diego and working for the athletic department.
Great. Well, we want to have a football-focused discussion here as much as we can. There's obviously a lot of big topics surrounding the NFL in particular. So we'll jump into one of the big ones, CTE, obviously a big story the last several years. Jim, you wrote a book about Junior Seau, my icon, my hero growing up as a Chargers fan. I want you to talk a little bit about following Junior, and obviously it was found out that he had CTE, and how you just kind of view that topic. You've been covering the NFL.
Wow, that could take a whole show,
Right.
Seriously. I'll say this first off, I'm really proud of the way the players now are taking more accountability for their health. The one thing the league announced this year is that the rate of disclosed concussion was up among players, that self-reporting was up among players, which I think is great. I think players are finally starting to understand how serious of an issue it is. Now, having said that, there were, for decades, the league, I believe, hid this from the players. Even when the information was brought out by Dr. Malu, initially the league kind of poo-pooed it and said that, it wasn't credible, those sorts of things. And you go back to when I first started covering the NFL in '96, there were all these, what I call euphemisms for concussions. You got a dinger, or you got your bell rung, or all of these things. And at that time, players believed that as a part of showing your toughness, you had to play through those things. And so with a guy like Junior, he would have these concussions, and he would just always say, oh, I got my bell rung, I've got to play, you've got to be tough. And I'll never forget the one story that stands out to me was training camp one year. O'Donnell can speak to this, but the coaches decided to have a run drill, ISO run drill, full contact. And so you've got the linebacker coming downhill and the fullbacks coming downhill, and they're going to meet in the A-gap, which is between the guard and the center. And so here comes Junior, 255 pounds, and here comes Fred McCrary. And that collision was unlike a sound I had ever heard being around an NFL team. I mean, it resonated across the UCSD campus where they were having training camp. And it ended up putting a 3-inch split in the crown of the helmet, the fullback's helmet, Fred's helmet, and it dented his face mask. And I'll never forget, Fred told me later that night, he said when he got up from the hit, he was seeing spots. But, and everyone's slapping you on the head like, great play, great play. Later that night, he sees Junior. He's like, man, my head's killing me, And Junior's like, mine's on fire too. But he's like, we can't tell the trainer. And so for Junior, the fear was they would take him off the field. And for Fred, the fear was he could lose his job, and he's finally got a chance to be a starting player. And 6 months later, Fred he told me that the condition was so bad that at like 2, 3 in the morning, he'd be laying in bed with his wife, and the room and the bed would start spinning. And his wife was so fearful, she's crying like, we got to go to ER, we got to go to ER. And Fred's like, I can't. If I do, I could lose my job. And subsequent to that, years later, he would have to sit in a room in his basement with blankets over the windows, keeping all light out. And his young sons come to know that, oh, this is just daddy time. He's having headaches. So obviously it's an incredibly sensitive and important subject. And again, I'm just happy that players are starting to finally understand just how serious it is and to take their health more seriously. And, Donald could speak to that, having played.
Right, and like Jim mentioned, I think players are starting to advocate for themselves. They understand the long-term effects, but it's a fine balance that you do have to walk. Like Jim mentioned, is you do have to worry about your career, the short opportunity that you have. So when you do report these concussions, well, maybe a team may not invest a second or third contract in you. So you got to find out what's most important to you. Also, I think it's I kind of use the analogy of a shark sighting or a shark attack. Like, they're out there. When it happens, people are fearful of getting in the water. And it's kind of like the CTE. And you understand, from findings of Aaron Hernandez, so somebody who's much younger now, and yes, he was diagnosed with CTE, they found. So when things like that come out, it makes you think about it, makes you cautious. But a couple weeks go by and you kind of go back to status quo, the nature of the game. And unfortunately, it's just a nature of the game. It's a very violent game, so it's a part of it. So.
Yeah, you brought up Aaron Hernandez. We were talking about that the other day. It's just a hard story to understand.
Yeah, I remember waking up 3 a.m. to go to work one day, and I'm checking ESPN before I go, and they're saying breaking news, Aaron Hernandez has passed away, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe it happened because of his court case and what had happened prior, and then you find out that he has CTE, and I was just like putting the pieces together, and it's very shocking for sure.
But see, the thing is, too, sometimes we want to paint with a broad brush, and believe me, I'm not in any way minimizing the seriousness of CTE. But then the question comes up, why doesn't every player suffer from the same conditions that guys like maybe Aaron Hernandez or Jr. or Dave Dorson or others who have committed suicide or who showed signs of suffering from this, depression, irrationality, all those sorts of things. And so you wonder, why don't all players have this? And now they're saying they're finding it in younger players, even as early as high school, who may lose their life and their brains are tested and is showing signs of CTE. And matter of fact, last week I saw a report that said there was someone who never played football and their brain showed symptoms or signs of CTE. So there's still a lot to learn about it, and I think that's where you've got to be careful not to just paint with a broad brush and to jump on this. It is serious, but there's still, even players will tell you there's so much more that has to be learned about this topic.
Yeah, and you said it, it's such a growing industry of research. This being kind of a sports business discussion to some degree, how do you think it's going to affect the financial future of the NFL going forward, if at all?
You want me to take it first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Truthfully, I don't think it's going to from this standpoint. One, I think the league is always going to have a player pool. People say that families now are starting to stop their kids from playing. And that may be true, but percentage-wise, that number is so minuscule. What I'm seeing from players, the NFL players in particular that I talk to, is that what they're doing is that they're prohibiting their kids from playing contact football until high school. More of them now are having their kids play flag football because it teaches many of the elements that are important or that translate to contact football, whether it's tackling and breaking down, keeping your head up, all these sorts of things. So I don't think it's ever going to hurt the game from that standpoint, financial standpoint or a player pool standpoint. The other thing is with the lawsuit or the settlement that was reached, now players can't claim ignorance on this subject. And so from a league standpoint, a business standpoint, today's players aren't going to be able to go forward and sue the league for negligence or for hiding information from it. So I think from that standpoint, the league settled that for roughly $1 billion, which from an NFL standpoint is pennies on the dollar, basically. If every team were to raise its ticket prices, season ticket prices by $1 over the next 20 years, they've covered the cost of that lawsuit, particularly when you talk about insurance. So I don't think that this is going to end football as some people think. I just think it may change the way some people look at it and some people approach it, but there will always be a player pool and there will always be a market for it.
You want to touch on it at all, Donald?
I think Jim hit it right on the head. It's not going to affect, unless the players strike, the players sit out. That's the only way, and I don't see that happening. Players are always going to want to play, and I think yes, you do take the right steps, especially like Jim was saying. You introduce football in incremental steps. Start your children in flag football. Let them appreciate the game, get the fundamentals, and then introduce contact. But as far as financially hurting the game, I don't think it will. Players are going to play.
Here's the other thing, though. When I talk to players of that juniors generation, and I say, knowing what you know now, would you play again? Seeing what's happened to the junior Seals, the Dave Dorsons, the Andre Waters, all these different people. And almost to a man, every one of these players that I've talked to say, yes, I would play again. For different reasons. Some say they set up generational wealth for their family. They may come from families that didn't have much. Now they set up generational wealth. For others, it's about the camaraderie, in that locker room and those things. For others, they've been gifted something. And so they want to, it's where their identity is and where they feel their purpose is, that sort of thing. So I found that fascinating that even as we were learning more about it and you were seeing some of the potential pitfalls, guys were telling me if I had to do it over again, even knowing what I know now, I would play again.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, now that you guys have both brought up both of those points, do you think that perhaps from a business perspective, some of the football helmet companies are potentially have the opportunity to redesign helmets to improve head protection as well as further the research of CTE, seeing different helmet designs and whether or not they promote CTE or don't?
We're already seeing it. There are a number of companies that are working with the NFL now to try and improve the helmet. But the bottom line is, I don't care what you do to the helmet. When as Donald said, it's a violent sport. People say it's a contact. It's not a contact sport. It's a collision sport. So the head, whenever the head is in play, I don't care what type of device you have up here, there is a shock element, and the brain can move. So I'm not sure you can ever completely take that out of the game or the danger out of it just because of a helmet. Hopefully you make it safer, but the league has to find a way to get the head out of the game more frequently, because you're never going to take it out of the game completely.
I agree. Even during my short 7 years in the NFL, I saw the evolutionary changes of the helmet. But it's a part of the game. The head's in play, and people have said, well, hey, remove the helmet. Okay, well, now it's rugby. And you've seen, plenty of rugby guys, somebody a rugby guy who hasn't had a concussion. So, you just need to find ways to minimize usage of the head, but it's tough. It's very tough.
Great, awesome commentary, guys. Let's move on to one other topic. We'll just touch on it briefly. National anthem demonstrations, the storyline of 2017 for the NFL, right? I just really want to get your guys' brief take on it. There's, I believe, an NFL owners meeting here in late March where they're going to kind of try to come to some consensus. But I don't know, Jim, you covered it this year. What do you think?
No, I covered it a lot. And going back a couple of years ago when Anquan Boldin took a group of players down to Capitol Hill to meet with lawmakers about addressing criminal justice reform and sentencing and those sorts of things. Look, I'll say this first off, full disclosure. I'm so proud of these players, for one, finding out not only that they have a voice, but the power of their voice on this platform, and to stand up and fight for things that actually are bigger than them. I applaud them for it. Now, that brings into play a lot of different things from a business standpoint. If you're an owner and you're looking at the bottom line, you're saying, how much does this impact our game and our bottom line? And you can look at it through a very narrow prism and say, okay, we're going to be reactive to the negative voices we hear now and people who have conflated what this issue is really about. This issue initially was about addressing police brutality and oppression against people of color by law enforcement. All of a sudden it turned into a discussion about free speech or lack of respect for the military or law enforcement, which is not what it's about. So from an owner standpoint, you can say, I'm going to listen to that vocal outcry there, or as some owners have done, you take a longer view and you say, you know what? This is important to our players, so it's important to our games, and there's another segment of the population that says we stand behind these players, and they may not be as vocal, but they bring in revenue to our game as well. So it's a really fine line. The thing I'm curious about now is I've heard two different things now, depending on who you talk to in the league. One is that they're talking about rewriting the game operations manual to say that now players will be required to stand for the national anthem as opposed to they should stand for the national anthem. And I think if they do that, they're going to have even more problems than they have now, because now players are going to feel like you've backed them into a corner and they're going to want to challenge you on that. The other thing I'm hearing is that there's going to be a discussion about whether or not to even bring the players out for the national anthem. But then that would require the NFL to lose some revenue that it gets from the military for these pregame demonstrations and whatnot. So for me as an outsider, I think the best solution is to show your players that we hear you. We believe this is a topic not only for our players, but for our society, and we want to work with you going forward on that. And yeah, we may have a few who take a knee, but I think that most folks over time, that goes away and the focus will be on the good that's being done as opposed to, 2, 3, whatever it may be, who may still take a knee. I could talk on that subject all day. I really could.
Donald, your take on it?
And like Jim was saying, I mean, it's great that players do understand the power of their voice and they're able to stand up for issues going on in the country, in the world, things that are so much greater than themselves. But it is kind of where it's a very fine line that you're walking there. Me personally, I always saw the national anthem as a time to show respect. Think about the men and women overseas that are fighting for our freedom, being able to play the game. But I will also say, I've always been somebody say, if you want to see change, you got to make change yourself. So maybe, hey, if you want to see change in law enforcement, then stop playing football and go be a police officer. Be an example of what it looks like to be a law enforcement officer in the community, things like that. So, it's a very tricky subject, but it's nice to see players are standing up for something much greater than themselves.
Like you guys have said, it's a very complicated situation. Looking at it from a sports perspective and a business perspective, I think you're able to take it from different angles and see how you're able to get involved with different things. But I definitely think it's a conversation that going forward we need to have, because the conversation was sparked a few years ago and now we're having the conversation now of why are they doing this and where do we go from here, and is there an endpoint or transformation of what we're talking about going forward?
Well, see, I would argue also that it's not mutually exclusive where people say it's a sports issue or a political issue or a business issue. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think it's all of those things. And politics has always been involved in sports. I mean, you can go back decades to pinpoint where politics have been involved in sports, even where the president once tried to outlaw football, so because of the dangers of it. So, I mean, we can go back in history. To Donald's point, though, about players maybe getting out of football and going into law enforcement, I think it's a slippery slope for me for this. Again, you've been given a gift that you had to be able to play this game at an extremely high level. So do you pass up or do you turn your back on what your true gift is for something where you may not be as talented? And what I appreciate about these guys is that they're going out in the communities and they're going out and meeting with law enforcement and they're going out and meeting with congressional members to try and find a way that we can all work together to try and find a solution to this, as opposed to just shining a spotlight and saying all cops are bad or whatever you may want to say. What's been fascinating to me, truthfully, is when President Trump came out initially and made his comment about players and calling them sons of bitches and they should be fired, and to see in the locker rooms around the NFL that week where all of the teams had to meet and talk about how are we going to address this. And you had some players, Pro Bowl, Hall of Fame caliber players, who said, I'm not taking a knee, even with what the president said, because I disagree with it. I have family who's in the military, this sort of thing. And you had others who were saying it's not about that, it's about something else. You saw a discussion. And those players were able to have a discussion that many in society aren't able to have because we become so tribalized, in terms of how we view these things, that either you're with me or you're against me, and there's no nuance and there's no way to have a real honest discussion. And that's the thing I love about a locker room, is that you bring together guys from all different backgrounds, whether we're talking racially, politically, economically, whatever, and they're able to have these discussions and deal with these issues that we in society don't seem to be able to deal with yet. So it's a fascinating topic, and it's only going to, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I'm eager to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. All right, one final topic we can touch on here. I'll call it the state of San Diego football. We're obviously a year removed from losing our NFL team. I don't know where to start with this, but Jim, you've been in San Diego for a while. How do you see this?
It's funny. First of all, I think it's sad that the Chargers aren't here. Look, I'm a traditionalist. I believe the Raiders belong in Oakland. I believe the Chargers belong in San Diego. I'm not one for franchise movements, particularly when you talk about some of the original AFL teams. So from that standpoint, against that backdrop, they belong here. Having said that, I'll never forget when news broke that they were going to leave. I was in studio that night, and I was on air, and the anchor asked me, well, what are you hearing from people in San Diego now that this is out? And I said, a lot of folks are devastated. They're so closely aligned with the Chargers and this, that, and the other. Anyway, I got off there, and I went to social media, and there was a guy that came at me and said, man, that's a really limited prism you looked at this through. And I started to think about what he said, and I thought, he's absolutely right. I'm looking at it from a fan standpoint, but there are other people in San Diego who said, wait a minute, we should not be using public dollars to subsidize billionaires for the building of a stadium. And so while they may love the Chargers, from a business or practical standpoint, they're saying we have other city services we need to address first. And then you had another group here who's just sort of apathetic about it, like I'm not a football fan or whatever, I really don't care. I've got other things I'm more concerned about that may impact me. So having said that, I think it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a longtime football Charger fan here, they're still devastated and they hate the Spanos family and they hate the team for leaving. If you talk to other folks who look at it through a different prism, they feel like, this was the right thing, that cities shouldn't be held hostage by pro sports franchises. And then there's another group that just says, you know what, I really don't have any opinion on it one way or the other. It doesn't impact me.
I see from the Spanos family and why they made the move. It's a business move, but it is hard for the players that have been a part in that locker room for almost a decade, and now you're up north. Yes, you still have the same name. You're still the Chargers, but it's a different city. You're basically going to a new team, basically, and so just to uproot, and guys have families here and things like that. So there's a lot of change, but it's the nature of the beast. So you just got to keep rolling with it. But but it's a business at the end of the day.
I always say this, my message to fans, the reality is fans think with their hearts and owners think with their wallets. And if you just remember that whenever it comes to a decision that has to be made in the NFL, you'll know where the outcome is going to be. And that's why it was kind of interesting to me that so many people were shocked that the team actually left. I wasn't, because again, owners think with their wallets, fans with their heart. And owners are going to watch their bottom line and look at their long-term business model. And it just wasn't adding up here for the Spanos family. Now, you can say they're at fault because they should have been able to work better with the city. But I think that if you take the emotion out of it, I think there's blame to go around on all sides.
And I think to your point, you kind of just summed up sports business in itself. The fans are looking at it from, this is my identity, and the owners are looking at it from a business. Sure. And it kind of just, that synthesis that you just gave sums up this conversation, I think.
So with the void of the Chargers, that has made the Aztecs a little bit more popular. Their attendance has grown. They're coming off 3 double-digit win seasons, I believe. Donald, you work in the athletic department. I've talked to some other folks in the athletic department. Everybody seems to say it's kind of a school, a department on the rise.
Yeah, it definitely is, and there's been tremendous success. So it is, very exciting to see the possibilities of what could happen over in Mission Valley, but only time will tell. Definitely makes sense. The city's excited about it. The city's rallying around. So, it's exciting for all parties, but, we'll see in a couple months how everything plays out.
Absolutely. Real quickly, last question for you. Do you ever foresee an NFL team somehow, some way coming back to San Diego 10, 20 years down the line?
Never say never, but I don't see it in the next 10, 15, 20 years, no. I mean, if that were to happen, the only way I could ever see it happening was say, the Chargers coming back to San Diego, which at this point I just can't see. So I can't see 3 teams within, a 125-mile radius, basically. I just don't see that working.
All right, gentlemen, it's been fun. I know we could do this all day. I'll go ahead and give everybody one last chance to kind of put in their final word. What do you have to say, Greg?
I think This has been a great conversation. I definitely think that as far as football goes, we can look at it from a lot of different angles. And I think because we are in San Diego and talking about college and professional, I think it gives us a great insight of how helmets come into play, how this city loves football, and looking at it from a business perspective is definitely important too.
No, I just say thanks for having me. I enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to do it again.
Yeah, appreciate you guys joining us here. Donald Brown, Jim Trotter, Greg White. I'm Andy Bishop. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time on the Sports Biz Connection. See ya.